You're on mute, sorry. Now go.
Councilor Martinez, are you here? Thank you. Councilor Page?
Here.
Councilor Kendall?
Here.
Son. Councilor Pittman? Here. Councilor Smith? Here. And Mayor Linehan is excused this evening.
Okay, thanks, folks. We're gonna move right into our next item, which is the consent agenda. And it's before you. You know, obviously, we're gonna act on this in a single motion, but it does include the minutes of the previous meeting, the agenda for this meeting, a resolution appointing Zach Gator to the Parks and Rec Board through June 30th, 2024. And I understand that's that. And then appointing Mr. Gonzalez to the Langley Board for a term through June 30th, 2026. I don't see Larry out there, but I think most of us know Larry. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Move for approval of the consent agenda.
Before we do that, Jackson, you want to?
Sure. You're certainly welcome to step up if you want to.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you. I've seen the hot seat here. I appreciate you guys for thank you guys for having me, and I appreciate allowing me to be here. I just want to introduce myself. I met some of you. Those of you I haven't. My name is Zach Gator. New to town. Just moved here in November to the Greenhill apartment, so right here. And construction there. And originally from Tiger, Oregon. Kind of give you guys a little background about myself. Born and raised in Tiger, Oregon. Played hockey growing up. Which is currently my full-time job that I do here as well in town. After I graduated high school, I was fortunate enough to go play junior hockey in Canada. And then from there, I was recruited to go play hockey in Wisconsin, and so played hockey there. Did that and then stayed and then coached at Center Hockey for 14 years. And then the pandemic obviously hit and different things kind of put things in perspectives from that front. And my wife and I decided to return a little closer to home. And I'm a 4-year-old, wanted to be closer to family there as well. And I exposed to those things. And so my wife took a job at PCC. She's the director of enrollment. So any high school students here that can course, college course, class, you oversee all of that. That's originally kind of what got the ball rolling. And then the Winter Hawks called and asked 5 majors coming out and helping with their program. So currently I oversee all of the youth hockey here in Portland. Our team actually just good news, completely off topic, but I coach the 14 team here as well, 8th grade and freshman. And I just finished the top 15 in the country and got selected to represent Pacific Northwest national tournament. So it's pretty neat. But again, for me, I want to be back and be a part of the community. And some of this I've really gotten to enjoy it since the pandemic happened. Once my son and I, we love going to different parks and slides and things like that, and kind of see all those different things and provide a different outsider's perspective and ultimately be able to give back to the community. Something that's been really important to me throughout my time. I've been involved in various different organizations, different charities and things like that. And would love to help in any way that I can. You guys allow me to be part of it.
Great. Is there any questions?
I
Well,
just want to say thanks for launching for this job. Being a coach is a pretty good job. You can help develop people, which is pretty good there. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, very rewarding. That's a difficult moment. My previous job, I was with 21 to 26-year-olds. Some completely different demographic and working with youth and that as well. But it's very rewarding, a chance to give back and to help these young men and women hopefully move on to fulfill their dreams and goals.
very good. I was just going to say welcome, and we appreciate you stepping up. It takes people to make a community work, and it certainly takes a number of volunteers to make that happen. And having the a voice and participation in the communities pretty crucial to our mind in the community. And so welcome, and we're glad to have you on board.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I have a motion on the table. I'm looking for a second. Okay, motion was made by Councilor Kendall, seconded by Councilor Page. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, that's going to take us into our presentation, which I presume is going to be done by none other than Mr. Barber. So you've got the floor right now.
Thank you, Board President Sheldon. It's my distinct honor to deflect this to someone else to give the presentation. And that'll be Josiah Close, the consultant with HDR. If you remember, Josiah in a work session about a month ago kind of gave us a water rates 101 and an overview of what's going to go into a cost of service study. So he's here with some of the preliminary results and the findings from the study thus far. So Josiah, I'll kick it over to you and I'll pull up your PowerPoint. Probably not so good.
Well, by the end of this, hopefully you'll all be experts and. So, yeah, like Amy said, came here about a month ago to go over kind of the methodology and process to go through for setting rates. So today we want to talk more about the results we had as well as some action for you all to help us formulate how we want to go forward. We have an alternative rate structure that we want to go through. And so we'll do that. So
Josiah?
refresh on the purpose of the rate study.
Josiah,
Yeah.
can you, I think that mic's off. Can you flip it on?
Yeah, so
Well, there's a switch on the top
On
of
the
it.
top.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
That works. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, we'll look at the draft results and then talk through the next step as we go through in the process. So just a brief overview. Talk about, so for a rate study, we want to look at the overall level of rate revenues compared to the expenses that we have, the operating expenses, capital expenses, as well as some financial planning criteria that we might want to consider, things such as debt service coverage ratios, reserve levels, making sure we're not too leveraged, those kind of considerations. So we can quantify those and build those into our expense profile, and then compare those to the rate revenues that we charge for the water services and determine a balance or deficiency of funds. And then from there, we can think about how we want to move forward and transition rates to a level to meet those needs that we have for a rate study. And we use the American Water Works Association M1 manual as our guide to help us go through the process of determining what expenses are applicable and some of the procedures that we use. So that's an industry standard manual that we use to help us develop the study, as well as use the characteristics from the system itself, as well as the characteristics of those using the system. So how they impact the system. So this slide just goes over kind of high level what the process is. It's 3 interrelated analyses. The revenue requirement is essentially what I was talking about, summarizing all of our revenues and expenses, determining balance or deficiency of rates. From there, we move into the cost of service, where we take our test year of expenses and we allocate them to functional categories, the costs, and then we distribute it to the different customer classes of service based on how they utilize the system. And then the rate design is how we're going to collect those costs once we've identified what our level of rate revenue needs to be in the revenue requirement and who is responsible for what proportion of the cost and the cost of service. The rate design shows or determines how we're going to collect those costs from the customers. So fixed charge, variable charge, and stuff. some key assumptions in the study. We started with the fiscal year 2022-23 biennial budget, and then we escalate costs from there based on some inflationary measures that we have. We incorporated our growth outlook for the future with the expansion of the UGB and some other considerations that we have, purchase water costs as well, and escalate those out, considering the cost allocation changes there. We also have an assumption of sunsetting the transfer to the general fund from the water utility, so that impacts things as well. And our baseline for the capital improvements is the 2019 master plan. So we incorporate those projects and the timing and work through the funding of those projects. And some key goals and objectives we wanted to set out to develop rates based on the different customer classes of service. So we were using residential, commercial, and irrigation for that. And then we want to come back probably in 3 or so years once the expansion of the urban growth boundary has been set, and then that will drive some of the capital project timing, the scope, magnitude of those. And so we want to look short term that we may need to come back and reevaluate things because there could be a substantial change there. So looking at the capital improvement plan. So we have the base year fiscal year 2023, which we're in currently. The dark gray bar is what we're funding through rates. So that's the component in rates that we look to from a rate setting perspective. We want to make sure we're reinvesting in the water system to replace, the deficits and the aging infrastructure, keep up with the depreciation and the useful life. So that's that component. And then we also have projects related to growth or capacity. The SDC has been based on those capital projects and timing, and so we utilize that as a funding source. And so you can see as we go out over time, we have a little bit less of some of those growth projects, but we have some more renewal replacement projects and capacity within rates to address those needs as we make sure that we're providing consistent water service to the customers. And then this one is a summary of how we accumulate those costs. So the dark gray bar is our operations and maintenance expenses, salaries and benefits, any materials and supplies, those kind of things. The light gray box above that is the purchased water costs, which is for the water utility, a substantial line item as a source of supply. We then have the net debt service in that green color there for the water tank. And then you can see the blue bar there is the rate funded capital, which we saw as a component on the prior slide. This is where we tie the loop, funding it through rates. We want to make sure that we account for that. And so that's the component there as well. And so what that means is what we're showing is due to the growth as well as the sunset of the general fund transfer, we're able to keep rate levels flat for 3 years. And then we need to increase them at more of an inflationary level out there at 2.5% for a couple of years. And that's again to fund the O&M expenses, the capital projects, as well as any of the financial planning criteria that we've identified, and making sure that we have adequate minimum reserve levels and things like that for contingency. And these impacts are before any cost of service adjustments. They're just a average bill comparison there. So the cost of service, once we have the revenue requirement, so we look at how we want to allocate those costs between functional components. And then how we distribute those costs from the functional components to each customer class. So based on the number of customers, based on their average water use, based on how they peak on the water system and their demand profile, we can then allocate the cost to them based on those needs. So it's proportional to how they impact the water system. And that helps us determine as well if there's any interclass subsidies, and there's unit cost development that we can use in the rate design to help us inform what those rate levels should be. So the next slide, we have on the left there is a box of a summary of our functional costs. So commodity is your average day or just your total water usage cost. So we have 365,000 there. Capacity is those driven by the peaking factor on the system. So what's the difference between your average day usage and your peak summer usage? As those costs are related to how the system is designed from an engineering perspective, line size, tank size, and et cetera. The next cost is the weighted customer meters and services. That's our fixed component. And we distribute those costs based on the capacity allocation on meter size. So customers with a larger meter have a higher potential capacity. And these are fixed costs, that are substantial things like purchase water costs and the pipeline, things like that are there to serve no matter how much water is used. A lot of those are in the customer cost. And then public fire protection, there's a small component as well for that that we distribute to the different customer classes. And one more thing on that. The distributed costs is just a summary of then. So we take all those functional costs on the left, and based on the proportionality of each of the customer classes and how they use the system and how many customers, et cetera, we're able to move those costs to each of the customer classes and come up with the total amount or estimated amount, basically the cost to serve them. And so then when we look at that versus their current contribution of rates, we're able to come up with, this graph which shows compared to their current contribution, what adjustments we might want to make. And typically when we review these results, because there's so many factors within them, it is just one test year. And so it's dependent on a lot of things, structure of the budgets, where costs are moving, as well as consumption habits for 1 year. And so we typically give ourselves plus or minus 5% is what we say is within cost of service. And that's just because, again, year to year, these numbers can change. And so what we want to avoid with a cost of service analysis or any of these financial planning approaches is rate shock or increased volatility. So we don't want to overcorrect. And that's where we get those 5% bands. We don't want to overcorrect and then do a cost of service in 5 or 10 years and notice that we overcorrected right, and then we have to lower rates for one customer class or whatever. So that's where we get this band. So you can see we're pretty close on irrigation, although they could probably go up, but they're still relatively close to that. The overall, this is for 2024, so the overall percentage is 0. So our band would be plus or minus 5%. Commercial could go down slightly, and then residential is paying pretty tight to what their the cost of service is showing what the cost they incur to provide that service. Going into rate design. So currently you have base fee by meter size, and the cost increases based on the AWWA weighting for meters and their capacity. And then you have a three-tiered increase in block consumption charge for all customers, 0 to 25 CCF, 25 to 50, and then over 50. And so what we did was we evaluated the consumption data for all the customers, the city's water system. And this is the residential customers under the present tiers. So what we've done is those bars are the count of customers within each consumption bucket, starting at 0, 0 to 2, or 0 to 2, 2 to 4, and so on. And we have that dotted line is the cumulative percentage of total. So if you look at the right side, as you go out over the consumption buckets, you add on all of those customers to get the percentage of the total. We then shaded in where the tier breaks are so that you can see for tier 1 for residential, if you go up to the top, it captures about 98% of all water usage. So that tells me that that tiered structure isn't really effective for a residential customer, right? It's not, if the theory behind it, a tiered structure is you're trying to encourage efficient water usage. And if everybody's just in the first tier, there's no incentive, there's no economic driver there. So what we did on the next slide and show, we have an adjustment of the tiers to tapping out at 6 to 8 there as the break 8, and then we go up to 20, and you can see we still get about 75% in the first tier, so a good amount of usage. But we're then incentivizing further some of those customers that might be using discretionary water in that 8 to 20 range, that we want to leverage the usage of tiers to encourage efficient water usage there. So what we're proposing is shifting those tiers slightly for residential based on the data that we reviewed. So for commercial, and then we'll see irrigation next, it's a little bit different story. And this is, I would anticipate to see this, but basically a tiered structure is hard to develop for that because the customer types within commercial or irrigation use water very differently between customers, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily using it inefficiently. It could just be the nature of the business they have. So you can see the line is much flatter as you go out over time with the, or out over the consumption buckets that we have there. And so what we would propose is a uniform structure for them where the cost, you know, reflects that much more of how the average commercial user uses water. And the next slide we go to, Andy, just shows irrigation is a similar story, that you have a pretty spread out distribution of the customers across the water usage. And so, as I said, we developed for residential. We're going to maintain the same fixed charge for everybody. So your readiness to serve, incorporating all the fixed costs that we have, all classes would have the same rate structure for that based on their meter size that they have. And then residential would have a 3-tier consumption charge with the revised tiers 0 to 8. 8 to 20 and over 20, and then commercial and irrigation would have a uniform consumption charge. So we have that comparison here. We have the status quo of what the rates would look like with no structure change over time. And you see there's no change until we get out of 27, 28 with the 2.5% per year. And then under alternative 1, you can see we revised the tiers. And so maintaining the same fixed charges, we can actually drop that first tier a little bit, 11 cents, as well as the second and third, since we are charging customers sooner, a higher rate in the second tier and third tier before the current rate structure where it kicks in at 25 and 50. So we're able to lessen the impact to lower water usage. What that looks like, it's hard to see here, but the 4 and 8 are slightly less than the gray. Again, it's a few cents difference per CCF. But then as you get out, you can see in 25 and 35 that the impacts to those customers would be slightly higher than the status quo or the current rates. And that would reflect our incentive to use water efficiently, as well as the fact that it does cost more to produce and plan for higher levels of consumption. as well as customers in that range typically peak on the system a little bit more. And so we have to plan for those water use activities as well. Commercial, again on the left, with no structure changes. And then on the right, alternative one moving to a uniform rate. And you can see that rate is somewhere between the second and the third tier, as their average use would be up in that range. And then that bumps along until we get 27, 28, where it increases it 2.5%. And irrigation is a similar story with a little bit higher uniform rate, which should address some of the results from the cost of service, showing that they're needing to pay a little bit more than they currently are. And increasing in 27 and 28 after we have made the rate structure change to 24. So then we did a little local comparison as well. So the first set on the far left is at the present rates at 0 units or 0 CCF, 6 CCF, and then 12 CCF, and then under the proposed. And then you can see versus some of the geographical and some demographical similar cities, as well as cities that have similar sources of supply. There is no apples to apples comparison, just because you never know where people are with renewal and replacement of their system. That's the big one, is capital, as well as source of supply. Things like groundwater are much cheaper to utilize, but you can get a good idea of where the city comes with regards to the rest of those cities. And you can see the blue bar that reflects the higher fixed charge we all have, but then it's really one that makes there once we get up with usage. So that's all I had. We can look at questions, and then really we're just looking at some feedback on the study, as well as the alternative rates. Get your input on those.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Councilor Page.
That was quite the eye chart with a lot of numbers. I didn't do a graph space, so I can't really see much. So all I heard was like, if you can see this, and you can see that, and clearly it's already here. Like, I can see much of it. How come there's a lot of information here, a lot of numbers and such? How come this wasn't presented to us, so we could look at it on the computer, or look at it and take some time to digest it? Just pretty much, yeah, and very good. And that's the end. Enjoy that. Who was doing for that?
We could definitely provide some more detail on it for you all to review.
Yeah, a great deal of data. Cool. Yeah.
May I interject? You can take that out on me instead of the consultant. I'll take that.
It's like they did a good job.
Okay, I'll make sure we provide that for you. We can revisit it, but it's not. I'm not gonna. I'll be happy to take that blame. So maybe what we can do is summarize in a one pager or something, some of the top takeaways. That way I'll distill a lot of this for you. I think the major takeaway it shows is for the next 3 years, there would be no rate changes at all. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Sorry.
All right. Any other questions? Councilor Page.
I have just a few questions. One, I'm remembering back to the slide with irrigation, commercial, residential, and it seemed like irrigation was going up 5% and commercial was going down 30-ish%. Thank you for trying to find that slide. And I'm just trying to think about our urban growth expansion, and industrial users are going to convert into that commercial category, correct? So why would we want to make it a great decrease for something that we know is going to be the next big boom, essentially? So I guess maybe if you could just start there, which
Sure.
that would be great.
Yeah, so there are a couple limitations based on what assumptions we have. With that expansion, it would, and that's why we're recommending, we'll need to come back once an engineering consultant would look at the capital projects, what kind of development it would be. Those would drive some of the costs and would change some of these results possibly, once we have data as far as water usage and some assumptions that way. It's not necessarily, so the minus 3.7% is with regards to how they're currently charged with the tiered structure. So it's more of saying their average rate for water usage under a tiered approach could come down moving to a uniform approach. It's not necessarily reflective of how they're utilizing the system. And a significant industrial customer could be different. A lot of times they use a lot of water, but they don't peak the system. So there is some significant capital charges, but as far as their water usage profile, it's much more, it's much more predictable. So we definitely were looking into that, but due to the fact that we're not sure some of these assumptions, what they would be, it's hard to determine what like an industrial customer or customers would do to the commercial class, or a lot of clients I work with, we develop those rates if it's warranted, dependent on the customer, their own class, right? If they are unique enough compared to commercial, that we would develop our own rate, utilizing again the assumptions of how that customer utilizes the system. We look at things like pipe diameter and things like that, right? Pump sizes and things that we need to serve that customer.
Okay, thank you. And I think really just for this exercise, my inclination is to, balance, take a more balanced approach than I think about the irrigation portion. And I'm guessing that's irrigation customers and farmers, so small businesses, that's HOAs, so impact that on the residents. And just how do we make this a more balanced approach, especially knowing industrial is the next big thing. And I know there's so many more calculations that you go on in the school, but that would be my only ask. I need to close to the final number.
Is there any additional questions? If not, I just have a comment. We obviously have a little bit of time. I think we need more. I have a tendency to agree with Councilor Phage. I don't want to get too caught up in the numbers, but that's a lot to digest. And I think about cost in terms of burden. I think, where we're pricing ourselves and what we should be doing. I'm not exactly sure what our burden is, and I still have a hard time how we compare with other communities in terms of where is that burden coming that they either have coming from another source that we're not seeing. I know I personally want to look at it more before I just make a decision. I think it's pretty fair to say in my mind, I can tell you that the legacy residents here are going to like the fact that there's any rate increases, because if we're going to try to have a levy we're going to pass, and then we want to turn around and jack up water rates, that's going to be a tough sell. One they can choose. We're going to do one after, so I guess not compounding things is important. But I mean, I guess I still need to understand it with a little more depth than what I'm seeing right now.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, piggybacking on what I said earlier, I think we can work to distill this. I mean, there will probably be some sort of executive summary in a report or something similar, but we can get a head start on maybe a one pager of the major variables and takeaways in this. And when it comes to comparing us against peer jurisdictions, I think if we keep these rates steady for 3 years, like we said earlier, they haven't changed for 10 years. So because of inflation, we've actually been, I mean, yeah, they haven't been, it's actually been a decrease from some standpoints, but I think some of these other jurisdictions I know are going to catch up to us. Matter of fact, I've heard that within a couple of years, they will be. So some of these things will even out. I think if we're able to keep these steady for the next 2 years, though, that'll be, that's a pretty good goal. And we're definitely mindful of what you said earlier, to balance having a levy and not trying to raise water rates at the same time. So just say, I imagine we could probably put something together to help distill all this down. And if we need to talk about it the next meeting, we can do that too.
Yeah, that would be good, because I have to believe that there is a presumption in the data that what's coming down the pipeline from the standpoint of the Willamette Water Project, what effects it has on the Joint Water Commission, which we're not part of the Joint Water Commission, but and maybe we should be someday, but right now we don't have a lot of control over that particular cost.
And we tried to take a conservative approach with that, as well as growth. So trying to be on the lower side on our growth assumptions, and with the purchased water costs a little bit higher, we tried to factor in some cost of service adjustment from them. Due to that, because of our growth, we're able to have a little bit more water. So, but yeah, I think we can definitely be a similar number to look at this on.
Okay, very good. Any additional questions? Last call for questions. Yes, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. We look forward to receiving some of that information. Okay, that's going to move us right into our staff reports. The first one, if I'm not mistaken, is Robin with the library. Robin.
Good evening. Am I giving my report here? Or are we using the table?
I think you're perfectly fine to go ahead and give your report from there. If you'd like to get up in front of us, that's fine. I don't see that being necessary.
Well, then good evening, Council President Sheldon and presiding chair for the evening and the councilors. I have to fall on the sword about Larry not being here this evening. I didn't realize that I thought I had missed the deadline for this particular meeting, and that he would be on the agenda beginning of April. So I am thrilled though that we have a complete library board now, complete 7 members. It wasn't too long ago that you voted to increase our board from 5 to 7, and now it is fully staffed with community members. And this Wednesday, Larry is actually teaching our Wise on the Web class here at Jesse Mays, critical thinking for teens and adults. That's this Wednesday at 6. And then next Wednesday is spring break, and our story times are on break, but we have a wonderful family program that is origami toys with Yuki, where you can make origami toys that you can actually play with out of paper. So there's some fun things coming up. Our numbers are stable. We're just on that steady increase year over last year in all of our various metrics for the library. And with that, open up for questions.
Comment, Chris? Oh, Mr. Councilor Smith.
Can you speak into the microphone a little bit more?
The library off.
Is that the Hillsborough Hops thing?
No, it's closed. You get a card. Library going.
Oh, yeah, the passport program like we had last summer. We are doing that again this summer. It was a really well received little promotion we had last year, where you had a passport that you could visit every library in Washington County and get a stamp. And we're doing that again this summer.
Yeah, I've had some comments with people.
Yeah, we had a wonderful, we had so many people discover our library because of that program, and we're really blown away by how beautiful it is. Thank you.
Great. I only have one comment, and that's I'm hoping you can relay to Mr. Gonzalez that if he doesn't have a lot of senior turnout, maybe he should have a course for seniors on internet safety. And I know it's for through adult, but a lot of times those folks are always a little more bashful about that in particular. But might be something you might want to suggest.
I certainly will, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And, go Hawks. We're big fans in our family.
All right, so we'll go to our second item on our staff report and Chief Haxton. Your turn.
Well, good evening. For February, one thing that really stands out that I'm looking at, is really the new home. We know it's about 1 or 2 calls, kind of the deal. But we're down quite a bit on most demand calls. Often self-initiated way up, but I think that's good for the city. Last month, good for public safety. There really was no trend. For overtime, you can see the calls that we had in the 60 hours, so we're still doing quite a few people signing up for the overtime, which is good. Like I said, the only thing I'll point out is you'll see some of the numbers don't exactly add up. And I think the big on that with some of the North Plains, the ones that you have for the down below, where it says the full number of something that you get the full public demand calls. That's actually in the specific city, so I want to make sure you understand those aren't going to add up because they're already kind of the officers will have to respond to somewhere outside the city. So can't expect those to line up exactly, but those are the calls specifically within the city. Other than that, the only other thing is still on the public town hall on the 29th. That's still to go. I'm hoping to talk to Quinn about insight from the right side. So, multiple questions.
Anybody have any questions? Councilor Kendall.
Excuse me, this may pertain to anybody here on the city staff. When I walk at Dyke's Garage, when I look at all their vehicles that they fix are on the city lot, when I'm looking at the one across the street, I've walked past that now a couple of years, and I think the 7 vehicles are still there that were there 2 years ago. I think it's sitting on city property, if I'm not right, or city right away, is it not? I'm just asking you, who would want to answer that?
Are you referring to Mr. Hahn's place? Or are you talking about?
Across from Dyke's Garage, the motorcycle people. There's 7 pickups that sit there. Can they sit on city property like that without being moved for 2 years?
No, they should be getting moved. I know some of them are getting moved.
Okay. The only comment I'll make, I see why the stop signs were there, and that helps some, because you couldn't see. That's a plus. That's a wonderful stop sign for the city. But looking at those things every day, I don't get it. So help me out, city staff. Is it something that you don't care about, or what do we do? We cleaned up one mess downtown. Now we got this one. I'm just asking. If you're good with it, then I'm good with it.
No, so that's something we can look at.
Okay.
Well, I would add that I think we need to look at that. It's in our core, and honestly, it's not very well reflected on their business. If they have a business, they should be thinking about, what that appearance looks like. So I think we should ramp up the pressure on it. I guess that falls in your lap from the standpoint of code enforcement, but that goes for anywhere that starts happening around town. And we've got a few spots, there's no doubt, and it's not the funnest thing to do to, get people to get their property that's, otherwise not, just taking up space in the right of way, so.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate the report. And that'll take us on to our next item, which I believe is community development. And Steve, I don't see Steve here tonight. Is there anybody that's going to take any part of that?
I can, let me pull it up. Counselor Sheldon. Yeah, Steve is not a department director, so I don't require him to come here. Most of this report, I pretty much know all the projects anyway, so.
I'd say anything that's, we need to know something about. I mean, obviously, I've read it, I'm pretty sure we've read it. It looks like my concern was, where are we at with the fencing issue?
That one I can fill you in on. The planning commission is going to have a work session that they're meeting in April to go over basically the clear vision area code. And I think so. Several residents from Bryn Hill were present at the last planning commission meeting. I think the planning commission seemed open to work with them on some sort of code change. Some commissioners were on the commission back in 2007 when that clear vision area code was changed. And so there was some discussion about, well, what was the intent when we did that? So they're kind of jogging their memory. It may be just as simple as having some sort of exemption or looking at going back into the historical record, although there's not much from the minutes about what was intended there, but we're working through those issues. Steve has some code language and comparisons and things like that for them to consider in April, and these residents know that too. So there's that. The other thing is just Far West. They about to resubmit their other application. They're withdrawing the back portion of the recycling center. They made some changes to the front of the property where the spec building would be and reduced the number of bay doors. I do know that. So when we get that, then we'll send that to the county to take a look at the new traffic considerations. Yeah, Public Works Building. Well, we'll talk a little bit later about that. Since that got the land use approval at the last public commission meeting as well.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about that? Like Councilor Paper.
Just to clarify, for Far West, are they still proposing a recycling facility or are they done in the spec building in place?
For right now, and actually now I'm looking in this notes, they did resubmit the end of last week. It would just be the spec building on the 10 acres in the front. I think recycling area on the backside is still in the plans, but they have some issues to work out with that. One of those is there's a wetland on the backside of the property, and they got to work through the Corps of Engineers through some of those things. So they're not even ready for that. There's going to be a DSL permit. So they have some of those things to figure out. What they are proposing though is if they did just the front part, the front 10 acres of the property right now, they would do the street improvements for 292nd and 298 all the way, or 289 all the way to the back to the upper property, as opposed to stopping halfway. They are proposing to do that.
Okay, and then you might not know this, but the plan when they submitted, is that still concurrent with the original plan during the neighborhood meeting? And then they had an initial idea of what you wanted, and they had another neighborhood meeting. That was the latest one. Maybe this is a question for Steve. I'm just curious if the plan is still the same.
You mean like the site plan,
Yeah.
where it was adjusted? Yeah. So before the buildings were like this, and now they're, they're parallel to the road, right? Yep. So they're just talking about the front spec building at the front.
I know we're not on a potential entrance yet.
Not that I've heard. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know they're getting some interest, and I mean, it wasn't long ago we had other people wanting us to connect connect them with the developer or the property for interest, but I'm not sure what their intended use is at this moment.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any additional questions about the community development report? Hearing none, next up is our finance. Okay, Counselor Smith.
2 weeks ago, 5 days ago, myself and the mayor met with one of the residents over there on the fencing. When we walked the area, my suggestion would be before they do a work session, maybe probably a good idea for them to actually see what's going on. We did cut back some of the fences, but I'm not sure if that's the proper way to go or not. But I think they actually go see it, you might have a different idea. If that's possible.
That's a suggestion. Right, any additional comments, and then we'll move on. Hearing none. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead with Mr. Reed and the report from the finance.
Thank you, President Sheldon. Let's see where to start. I guess the main thing, so this month, it's a non-capital funds summary month. We have 4 months left of the biennium. So, and I guess really kind of the main thing that hopefully the numbers indicate or point out or illustrate are that our operating funds, the general fund, the water fund, the streets fund, are doing pretty well through the end of February. And with 4 months left to go, we really should be on track for each of those funds reserves to grow a little bit more than even budgeted. Most departments, most line items, most categories of expenditure are tracking below budget. So we're being thrifty with our money, even with some of the inflationary issues that we're dealing with. In terms of detail by department, in the general fund, all the tables are there and you review them every month, and you saw for end of February through end of February. We've been looking through, and there's really no reason. We don't have enough employees in the general government department, and they don't earn enough for them to reasonably show up as the percentage over budget to date that it's showing. The software that we use for our accounting just still isn't, even with our working on it, properly splitting up and attributing staff costs to different departments. Like some of my work on a regular basis is actually doing community development things, but it's not attributing my cost fully to community development the way it should be. So what we're going to have to do is basically, with a new biennium, have the software company help us fix the problem. And the second thing we'll do is, when we close out the year sometime in June, or the biennium sometime in June, we'll basically just do some journal entries to fix where payroll attribution should be occurring when it shouldn't be general government. So that aside, really the only department line item that we continue to track and know for certain will be a supplemental budget issue will be materials and services and community development. UGB planning and everything that goes with it has just been kind of the difficult to budget, closely tracked, but it was difficult to budget, and that's just being higher than expected. So we'll come back to you and talk about that in detail with the supplemental and propose to you a number, hopefully that should get us through the end of the year. But that's really kind of the one line item or expense type that really is properly properly accounted and is just higher than expected. Streets fund, nothing huge to report there. It's doing well. Revenues versus expenses. Water fund, we did really well this year anyway, in terms of warmer weather and folks using water, and that benefited the water fund in terms of revenue. But got a Facebook memory last week. Cherry blossoms were full every year prior. Are there any blossoms right now? We just kind of have, unfortunately, a late colder spring starting. And so, will that show up being, slower return to seasonal water sales? Don't know yet, but that's kind of what it's looking like. So thankfully, summer water usage was up over last year, and that kind of set us up well for this cooler season. Water fund overdue balances. February was a great month in terms of overdue balances being paid up. We now have roughly $2,400 in overdue balances. A lot of accounts came due for whatever reason. February just ended up being a great month across the board. We didn't have our largest balances at the end of January were a few businesses who were just behind by a couple months. They came current. No HOAs are behind. That had been a previous issue. It was just a very good month. Okay. Let's see, anything ongoing. Property tax revenue receipts through end of February were at almost $760,000, all-time record for the general fund for property tax revenue. We should get about 15,000 more by June 30th of this year, but we're looking at about $775,000 in property tax for the general fund this year. So it's coming in at just a little bit above budget for the biennium. That's been a positive. Fuel tax revenue through the end of February, a little over $77,000. So still a bit below projections, but and hopefully the change of the more affordable gas prices that we're seeing at the new vendor, the new company, maybe that'll juice sales and get tax receipts up. So a little too early to tell. Budget season's in full swing. We've already met with all departments, operating departments. We've gone through budgets, kind of budget issues, and we're going to come back with some numbers here in the next week and really kind of start nailing it down. So that process is moving forward nicely too. Other than that, I'll stand for any questions if you have any.
Is there any questions? Not here, you're out there. Thank you. Appreciate that report. Okay, it's going to take us into our next item, which is consideration resolution number 2220, which is a resolution to construct a new public works facility. And in that, the competition was let for the GMGC, and the recommendation is before you in the resolution. With that, in addition to what's been provided in the report, which is pretty satisfactory in my mind, I'll leave that to Mr. Barnett to address anything you'd like to. Yes.
Thank you, Councilor Sheldon. No, nothing more to address. This originally should have been on the last meeting's agenda, but you have to have a 7-day protest period when you intend to award a contract under state law, and the ice storms messed up our schedule by 2 days. We missed that 7-day window, so we had to extend it this time. But anyway, the company that we noticed the intent to award, Swinnerton, has already started doing some pre-work, even though they're not under a contract, and they know that. But they have a good reputation. They did the credit union building in Hillsborough. They did Wingspan. They did the Hidden Creek Community Center in Hillsborough. So they have a lot of experience with mass timber projects. They even have their own timber lab and in Portland. And because of that, because they have a lot of vertical integration with what they can do, they countered to shrink the construction timeline from 12 months to 8 months, which is a plus. So there's some good things in their favor in working with this project. What this resolution tonight is because of the CMGC process, there's just a couple steps for approval to be to meet the procurement requirements. And in this one, you're just approving them to do the pre-construction services. So the bid in there is for the pre-construction. If they get through that stage, get through the permitting, the final design, and they offer us the GMP, the guaranteed maximum price that we like, is within our budget, we'll go, okay, move on to the general construction. That will be another contract, but that's it. That contract is for them, their construction, their subs, all of that. If they offer us a guaranteed maximum price that is above our budget or something we don't like, we have the opportunity to redo this with one of the other firms. We had 8 bids, we interviewed 3. We could go back to one of them. But we feel like Swinnerton will give us a good value, and there's more value engineering to do in this pre-construction time too. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Is there any questions? I only have a comment. I think it's a good selection. I looked at the criteria. I do appreciate the fact that the criteria was put in the report. I know I've probably cited in the past that I like to know how these things are arrived at, in my mind, at least, how we're selecting people and the basis we're using to do that. So I appreciate that being in there. I do have knowledge of Swinnerton, and actually all 3, actually most of the bidders from here, that are all capable. I think, you know, it certainly makes sense to me to move forward in this. So is there any last questions? And if there's none, I'm going to go ahead and entertain a motion for the adoption of resolution 2220 to select Swinnerton as a construction manager, general contractor for the pre-construction of the public works facility.
Was that a motion or?
No, I'll entertain the motion. Sorry.
I move to adopt resolution 2220. To select Swinnerton as a construction manager, general contractor for the pre-construction of the public works facility. I second.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Page and seconded by Councilor Haven to adopt resolution 2220. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing or seeing none opposed, the motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, that's going to take us into our report for the city manager. And he's given us a lot. I love the weekly updates. I think they're very succinct and to the point. In other words, I won't look on my words, but it's good to have that on the fly. I think it's something I'm sure the whole council appreciates. So I'll let you take it away with whatever it is you think you need to highlight if you're short of what we can't read on this.
Just because our mayor could be with us tonight, I'm sure she would remind everyone that State of the City is this week at 6 p.m. Thursday in this room. It'll also be on TVC TV live streaming for folks. So we just got the link for that today, so we'll send that out to the community tomorrow. And then the public safety town hall next Wednesday here in this room also. But just a reminder of those couple events, and then we had an on-site meeting last week to go over the downtown 60th anniversary celebrations, and those plans are coming together for June 1st too. So we'll need more to come on that and council roles and responsibilities. But other than that, everything else has kind of been covered in the previous reports.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Warner? Councilor Smith.
So how close are we to getting the van?
I just need to sign the contract. Yeah, I was going over the contract today, but yep, that's who we were meeting last week. Good. Yep. I expect some sort of 60s costumes or something from this.
He's gonna wear a tie-dye shirt.
Okay. If there's no additional questions, we'll move on to our council calendar. And, unless I skipped over something. Reports. Council reports. Councilor Page.
I attended the planning commission last week, and this is my second time seeing the downtown improvement. Nice. The planning commission was kind of busy. They had a lot of people from Fred Hill talking to the fence. So I wanted to bring up their council reports about that. They brought it up and they talked about it, and the planning commission thought that it meant something different from what it said. So they're going to want to look at it again in our work session to discuss it. They think that maybe the wording could be better, make it more clarified. The city agreed to stop the letters, asking them to fix it and block money. You know, wherever they were, it seems when agreed to be pausing until they look at it and have more information to the direction that we want to go and make sure that we do this right. So I have positive message for, you know, figure out kind of this. That was one of them. That's what I have for that.
Okay, any additional council reports?
So I attended the airport last week. That's Zach right over there. He made a great presentation. And I think just general putting it out there to the universe, I would love to see more potential applicants come to the meetings. From what I've seen, both in the actual board meetings for whatever meeting it is and here in council. I see the paper application, but it has so much more value to have the face to the name and to hear why they want to be on that particular board or commission. So putting it out there just to give some feedback. Not saying we need to enact any change right now, but it definitely helps. And the Parks Board is just trying to work through getting some more members to show up to their meetings and really talking through what that policy might look like for people that aren't active or present. And I think the last thing, Ricky already stole my thunder, is joining the Village of Lebanon, coming for the ice cream social on June 1st. Big celebration. Really excited to see that happen in our town. Excited to see everyone come together and where everyone's been a part. Mark the calendars for June 1st for the ice cream social. That's all I have.
Okay, great, thanks. Any other council reports?
I'd like to second Trish's thing about having evidence come in and talk to the person. It's great to ask questions, bigger than who to actually know somebody. So I just like people just want to make a simple jump out. And we quickly say, yep, we agree to I think it's nice, and I think everything's on it for that.
I know.
Good, Councilor Smith.
Oh, no, my understanding, we still have a couple of openings in the Parks Department. I thought there was 4 applicants.
Two of them rescinded their applications. The third one was out of town. And is still debating on whether he wants to keep his application current or rescind it. So there's
There were 2 that's no shows for a long time. Are they going to be replaced or?
yeah, their terms end June 30th anyway. So one of them actually did email us and say she was stepping back. So we do have that vacancy. There's a notice of it in the April newsletter, and it'll be on the website, and it'll be on the Facebook page, and I don't know if it'll be on the neighborhood thing or the notice that we get on our phones.
It'll be advertised around.
Yeah, so it's getting out. Word's getting out.
Only got 1 other.
Yes, I'm supposed to be almost in charge of the ballot and the pushing through. The levy. So should have it for us by next meeting. It looks like we're gonna need a lot of help. And so asking out pamphlets and stuff. I talked to the mayor today about it, wanting to get together. People first right before the meeting, have some type of flyer to go out. And maybe try to break up the neighborhoods and take a section, if that's possible, if everybody's interested in helping out. I will not be able to do door to door, something about it, but I will launch in the time to get a library, and I'll open up hours around the world. Just to park and run down there and have everybody that should go. That's gonna really need help. Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking that would be something we want to do offline. So I haven't talked to the mayor about it. We've had some brief discussions and it's obviously something we need to organize. So I think that's. All right, any additional reports from council? If not, that takes us into our council. I think that's pretty clear there. As far as the council meeting calendar for the ex officio, I did want to ask Councilor Pavement if she would trade 4 or 5 for the economic development for 5-3. I could actually do both. I want to be at the 4 or 5 meeting because there's some documents I want to present to the EDC for the outreach program and for some stuff in the chambers. So
I might be mistaken, but I might have a tentative budget meeting on 5-3. Or maybe I have it in my calendar.
5-3 sounds perfect.
As in
Budget,
May 3rd?
yeah, 5-3, May 3rd.
Yeah, no budget committee on budget committee meeting on May 3rd.
I saw it on May 3rd.
Oh, sorry, the second potential budget committee meeting. Yes, May 3rd, and then May 19th would be the final. That's right.
If we end up having one, we wouldn't have any EDC on the third then, because we'd be in the budget meeting, correct?
Well, it shows the budget committee meeting online at 7, the EDC at 6.
Oh, I have the budget committee at 6 and the EDC at 6.
Well, we need to fix that, so maybe we can get some clarity going forward. Just found an email about what is actually what it is.
But I can switch if we.
Okay,
Yeah.
We can connect offline.
Yeah.
all right, we'll do that. We'll wait for better word from headquarters. Thank you.
And for calendars for April and the last meeting. I'll be at or just a back. I'm not sure what.
Okay, so that'll be noted for the record. Mr. Page will be unavailable for council on 4/17. I will not be here for the state of the city address. I have another place I need to be. So I'll be out of town, and I do have somebody appointed in my spot to make the presentation for the mayor from the chamber. So that is all taken care of, but I just won't be present. I may catch it along the line if my schedule's right. Any other reports? So that'll be adjourned at 8:15. Thank you.
Good night.
Hey.